Hello and welcome to Fox 46's mayoral debate for Charlotte 2017. I'm Diana Alvear.
And I'm Brian Blakely. We have two candidates vying for Charlotte's mayor this year. 2017, Democrat Lyles and Republican Kenny Smith.
And this is going to be a much more informal type of debate. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to get to know where the candidates stand on all of the issues through question and answer. We'll have viewer questions, and we're going to get to know them on a personal level.
All right, let's start with Lyles, current mayor pro tem. She surprised the Queen City by winning the primary over incumbent Mayor Jennifer Roberts, and after graduating for Queen's University and UNC Chapel Hill, she worked for the City of Charlotte for almost 30 years, starting in the finance department, working her way up to budget director before retiring as assistant city manager, and then going into private business, and then going into holding public office. And jobs and affordable housing are a couple of items on her agenda.
And then we have Kenny Smith. He's a Charlotte native, a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. He currently lives just half a block from his childhood home with his beloved wife, Bridget, and their 3 children. First elected to the Charlotte City Council 4 years ago, he is serving his second term while working as a commercial real estate broker. Kenny's passion for politics is rooted in his love of service. He's served as a youth group leader, deacon, and a basketball coach.
Hey, I already see a couple of places where we can get along here. You guys are UNC Chapel Hill grads.
That is true, and I am wearing blue, and so is Kenny.
Yeah.
Go Heels.
Yeah.
Okay, so we said we were going to get to know them. So we're going to start with a quick 5 questions. So for both of you, think about this. What's your favorite place to eat in the Queen City? And I'm going to start with you, Vi.
Well, this Sunday, my granddaughter and I went to Portofino's on Eastway Drive.
Yum.
And she had the spaghetti and meatballs, and it was really good.
All right.
All right, Kenny?
I'm a barbecue guy. I love Midwood Smokehouse.
All right.
So I love it. They got the best pulled pork in town.
And just put one in over there at Park
Yep.
Road Shopping Center.
Yep, close
too.
to the house.
All right, here's another one for you. What did you want to do when you grew up? I'll start with you, Kenny.
What
did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be president.
President?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, you're in 4th grade, you think that you can do anything in the world, and Ronald Reagan was president, and he'd just come to Charlotte, and I was like, hey, I want to do that when I get
So Ronald Reagan was your inspiration?
Ronald Reagan's my inspiration. He came to Charlotte in 1984. Senator Helms was in a very tight race, and he came to help campaign back when he was running against Jim Hunt, and spoke over the old Park Hotel. It was a huge, in 1984, it was a huge deal to have the president come to the city. Yeah. And we all got out of school and went over and watched him speak. It was really cool.
All right, Vi.
I actually wanted to be a social worker. I started out as a volunteer working with some young people that were in trouble. And actually, it was at Polk Prison, youth prison in Raleigh, that I thought this is a place that you can make a difference, that people's lives would be changed. It was very difficult then. It wasn't the kind of environment that you would think about right now. And so the idea of working with young men that thought that they would never be able to be on the outside again, it was really both something that I thought I could do, but I realized how difficult it was for everyone at the time. So I didn't become a social worker.
All right, Vi. Well, what is one thing besides the obvious, oxygen, water, food, shelter, that you can't live without? Vi.
Oh, coffee. Got to have it first thing in the morning. I had to tell you this funny story. You know, most people have a coffee pot. I have to say, I probably spent too much money on a really great coffee pot, and my kids come in and say, how do you operate this machine? And I'm like, zzz, and coffee every morning.
There you go.
I'm right there with you on coffee. What about you, Kenny?
It relates to food, the big green egg.
The big green egg?
I cook on it 3-4 times a week and just could not live without that.
You're back to the barbecue.
Back to the barbecue. So.
All right, who's your biggest idol when you were growing up? You said Ronald Reagan. Was there somebody else that really inspired you?
Dean Smith.
Dean Smith?
I grew up a big Tar Heel basketball fan. He was a man of immense wisdom, immense kindness, and coached my beloved Tar Heels. And it was very sad when he passed away recently, and just loved Dean Smith.
All right, Vi, very quickly.
You know, it was my parents. My parents started out, my dad didn't go to high school, didn't finish high school. My mom worked as a domestic to work her way through college, and that just made all the difference in our lives. It was really important. Education was the #1 thing that we had to accomplish, and they made that possible for us.
Fantastic. These are great role models. Well, let's move on to our first question from a viewer, and they want to know more about how both of you plan to spend our tax dollars.
So I just think we have bigger issues in entertainment sometimes, and I know that's a wonderful feature, bringing tax dollars. However, I don't think it's our biggest issue that we should be tending to with the city's growth.
And Charlotte is a big sports town. We love our beautiful new sports venues and entertainment districts, but really her questions lead to a bigger topic about tax dollars and your priorities. Vi?
So the very first thing I would say are the services that everybody pays their taxes for are to make sure that we get our garbage picked up, your streets are clean, that the traffic signals work, that the water is in the faucet when you get up in the morning and you're ready to prepare for your day. I think that the basic services everyone should expect from their tax dollars are around keeping our city safe. We need to make sure that we have fire service and police service to keep our neighborhoods safe as well. So when I think about taxes, those are the very first things that we must accomplish.
All right, thank you, Kenny.
All right, Kenny?
That's a question about priorities. And so what I'm hearing in that question is, what are your priorities for the city? What are your vision? What's your blueprint, so to speak? We need to have adequate infrastructure. We're going to add 400,000 people over the next 20 years, and we need to make sure that those folks have roads to drive on, that they have water, sewer, they have places to live, development, places to shop. So we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure to handle the growth that's coming. We need to make sure that our public safety is up to standards. We need to make sure that they have the resources to keep us safe, to keep our neighborhood safe, because a safe neighborhood is a bedrock for the next one, economic development. We need to make sure we have resources out there for job attraction, job creation, and then job training.
All right, very good, Kenny. And you know, Charlotte continues to be one of the fastest growing cities in the country. You're just talking about this a little bit here. Let's talk about affordable housing. A couple of items on your agenda that are coming up for this mayoral election. And here's one question from our viewers.
Hello, how you doing? My name's Blanco. I live on the east side over there off of Albemarle Plaza. My question, with the way our beautiful city is growing so much, what do we plan on moving people with lower income?
You know, I'm a transplant myself, and at this rate, is Charlotte going to become a San Francisco or Seattle where only the wealthy can live in the city? And if you don't want that, then how do you plan to prevent that? Let's start with Kenny.
Nobody wants that. I think we've identified affordable housing as a big priority for our city. We have, as a council and as a community, we heard that after the events of last year, that people want to have safe neighborhoods, but affordable neighborhoods. I've got a 4-point plan that I've proposed. We need to establish a land trust, so we need to get the philanthropic sectors, we need to get the corporate sectors and the faith groups to come together, help provide some seed money so we can take down land, because once you go vertical, the costs are the same. Land cost tends to be the biggest barrier. We need to up the bond package. We had $15 million in the last bond cycle. Again, if this is a community priority, that's not enough. That's not a statement. We need to have targeted rehabilitation of aging market rate units that are going to transition into something else. We can use housing trust dollars for that. We can go in there, we can give an owner some housing trust dollars to make these more livable, to make them nicer, bring them up to standards. In return, what they give us is rates that they'll hold down for a period of time. We'll have to figure out what period of time that is, 25, 30 years. And finally, we need to address the locational policy. Right now, we have mandates on where housing can be built throughout the city. And I think if we're going to make a dent in the 34,000 unit deficit, if we're taking areas off the table, it's going to be hard to do that. The locational policy was designed to create more dispersion. And I think we've heard loud and clear that we want dispersion.
Okay, Kenny, thank you. And then Vi, I know affordable housing is something big for you.
It is, absolutely. I've worked on affordable housing for a number of years, but let me start off with saying the very first thing that we want to do to be able to afford to live in Charlotte, we need to have jobs. It's all about having jobs that pay enough so that people can afford to live inside of our city. One of the things I've said throughout this campaign, if you work in Charlotte, you ought to be able to live in Charlotte. I am so proud of the vote that the city took to make sure that we had an affordable wage of $15 an hour for our workers, those folks that work in our streets and collect our garbage. All of those folks are on their way to being able to afford to live in our community. And we need to ask other people to step up, and several, especially in the healthcare sector, they've made that same commitment. So affordable wages will help a lot. And then we need to talk about affordable housing for those that are not going to have that kind of wage, not going to have that job. How do we make sure our seniors are in safe and adequate housing? How do we make sure those that are disabled and not able to work have that? The plan that I put on the table has been there for a number of years. We've talked about dealing with homeless veterans, and we've been very successful. I want to deal with hotel homeless children and families. We've got to address this issue for stability in our families. So affordable housing, complex, but not that hard to fix. Resources and a plan.
All right, thank you, Vi. Well, coming up, dealing with crime in Charlotte. This year's murder rate continues to outpace last year's. The candidate solutions when we return.
Flashing blue lights, crime scene tape, and another family loses a loved one.
I'm supposed to be strong, very strong, because instead of celebrating like we usually do with family, his birthday, we actually have to be somber about what today means.
2017 has been a violent year, already more murders to date than all of last year. CMPD says they've been more transparent since the Keith Scott shooting, engaging in the neighborhoods more, but point to socioeconomic issues that play a factor in the rising murder rate.
What people don't want to talk about is the various systems that contribute, including not having families that are there to be your foundation, your base. We talk about education, we can talk about the lack of upward mobility, and what I want to talk about too is how we're trying to change that.
All right, one of the top issues right now, let's talk about crime in Charlotte, specifically that murder rate. 2 straight years now of a rising murder rate. Is this the new normal for the Queen City? And Vi, I want to start with you. You worked a lot. We were at Chief Putney and CMPD over the years.
Just had a meeting with the chief this week and want to say a couple of things. One, 70 murders, one too many. We also know that out of those, 60% of them have been already cleared and we have someone under arrest. But 75% are places where the race of the person that was killed, the suspect, is also of the same race. 75% of those folks are also being killed with guns. So we've got 2 issues to deal with. We've got to deal with how do we solve problems among ourselves by creating trust and working with the police department, but we've also got to deal with the gun violence that's going on in our city and the causes of that. So crime, big deal, but what I want to say, the CMPD leadership and every officer, laser-like focus. I think what we're doing and working with our community organizations to build that culture of trust and to make changes in our community. I'm very, very optimistic.
All right. Brian? Kenny?
It is a 2-point problem, and first thing we need to do, we need to get illegal weapons off the streets. We need to have stiffer penalties. This will require folks in Raleigh to help us. We need to have stiffer penalties for folks that obtain illegal firearms and sell them. Statistically, violent crimes, about 80% are committed with somebody that purchased a gun illegally. We need to work to get our DA's office more resources. 60% of those crimes are committed by repeat offenders. So we need to have the folks that are committing these really bad crimes stay behind bars. And we need to work on our community policing. So we need to make sure the officers have the resources. We're down about 244 officers now. We need to make sure they have the resources so when they go, we can get them out into the neighborhoods. Think about it. You know your teacher, you know your barber. Nobody knows their cop anymore. There was a time in our country where you knew the name of the officer that patrolled your neighborhood. We've lost that, and we need to get that level of re-engagement, I think, to help start stemming this problem, and they can help with conflict resolution and some other things within the neighborhood.
All right, let's move on to a question from the NAACP. What would either of you have done differently than Jennifer Roberts if you'd been mayor during last year's protest? Let's start with Kenny.
I think the mayor spent too much time on national television. I think that she spent time on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, didn't do any local interviews. You had to turn on the 9 o'clock news to find out what was happening in your own city. She wasn't visible. Take that with the conjunction of throwing Kerr Putney under the bus when the crisis was still evolving. I don't think that was a way that you handled it. I think we needed to have calm, steady leadership throughout that crisis. It was something that naively we thought it couldn't happen here, or many people thought it couldn't happen here. And then when it did happen, I don't think that she was up for the task.
All right.
Bye.
I actually would say it's not what I would do differently, what I was doing differently. I was actually in Marshall Park that night, and I actually saw people beginning to move towards the downtown area. It was not a good place for us at that time. It was not a good place for our mayor to be involved in just doing interviews and that kind of thing. What we needed to do was to work very carefully and respectfully, as well as in engagement with both our faith leadership, people that could actually come out and speak to the community with a stronger voice than sometimes the city council can, and a stronger voice sometimes than what we had in our mayor. And then the second thing that I would say is that we really did need to support our police department. Those guys were there 12-hour shifts. They were sleeping in the station. And in a crisis, you do not question leadership. You look at it and you see and examine what needs to change. But in a crisis, you support the people that are keeping us in a way that we have a peaceful protest. And that's some of the things that I think we can improve upon. We've got a report coming up that's going to examine carefully what happened, all the way from what the CMPD procedures were to what our role was, what social media's role was in this case. So we've got a lot to learn, and it could happen here. We've known about the differences in our city for many years.
Well, you know, Vi, you talk about the differences right there. I mean, you two are both very different. I'm not just talking male, female, Republican, and Democrat, but white and black. And yes, I am stating the obvious here, but one of the things that the Keith Scott shooting and subsequent riots really exposed is that racial divide that still runs deep in this city. How will you bring people together? Kenny, I want to start with you.
So, job of local government, they have three critical functions: public safety, infrastructure, and jobs. These are issues that impact all Charlotteans. I often say, raise your hand if you think a pothole is a Republican, raise your hand if you think it's a Democrat. It's something that simply wants to be repaired. We need to focus on the issues from a local government standpoint that citizens are most concerned with, that impact their lives on a daily basis. We have brought a lot of divisive issues, a lot of the DC politics have been brought into Charlotte the past 2 years. Those that have screamed the loudest have gotten the most sort of newsworthy events. That's not helpful. Now let's talk about the divide. It's individual accountability. We need to start, individuals in our city, we need to start stepping outside of our daily routine. We need to visit places of faith in worship. We need to start to get to know each other. On the nights of the protest when they were down in City Hall, they came down very angry. I became the source of a lot of their ire very early on, and there were two paths you could have taken. You could have gotten up and walked out back, or you could have gotten up and walked out front and tried to repair and tried to start to mend relationships. I walked up into the crowd, handed out my business card, invited people to lunch. I sat down next to one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter, and I said, you know, you're mad because you think people on the south side of Charlotte don't have any empathy for what you're going through. They're mad because they think you're uptown, tearing up uptown. Reality is, we don't know each other. And if we don't get to know each other, if we can't start to break the bread, we can't solve the problems. And I went out to lunch with several of the protesters that had been there that day.
Bye. With great respect for the District 6 representative, I think this is a lot harder than just breaking bread. I remember that time when Joe Martin said, we've got to deal with these issues of race. Right now, what we're dealing with are some systemic causes of federal and state and local policies that have really not given people a complete fair shake at what we need to do to have good jobs, to have a house to live in. I tell the story, my dad was in the military, GI Bill. He couldn't get an education, he couldn't get a house. The only thing he could get was a job preference because he was African American. So that was something that's been in the ground for a long time. It's going to take a lot deeper work. It's going to be more than we think about right now. And we'd have to deliver basic services, but the mayor's job is to build trust in this community, and that trust has got to bridge a number of differences between us. Race being one of them, poverty being another, economic opportunity. That's what a mayor has to do, and I believe that we've got to begin to have those conversations and continue to do it with deep regret, with deep feelings and facts and knowledge to begin to act on them to build trust in our city.
All right, it is going to be certainly a hot button issue going forward for the next few weeks until the election. We're going to be right back.
All right, as we finish up, we're going to change it up. I want to know, Brian wants to know, how both of you differ from your political party. So is there a particular area or issue where you stand differently from the majority of the members of your party? And I'm going to start with you, Kenny.
That's a great question. This is one of the ones I don't think we've been asked yet. I took a major deviation from my party last year when I voted against toll roads. We were under pressure from the General Assembly to support toll roads. We were under pressure from a lot of business leaders. The development community put a lot of pressure on us to support toll roads. I did not think it was good for Charlotte, and I stood up against the folks in Raleigh and voted against that. Affordable housing, that's an issue that is not often thought about in Republican circles. It's one that I believe in deeply. It's one that I think is something, if we're going to have a city that works for everybody, we have to have a city that everybody can afford to live in. I was proud to vote for $18.5 million recently that we're going to divert from Bojangles Arena over to affordable housing. Again, this is not an issue that my natural base talks about a lot. It's not an issue that they're really in tune with, but it's one that I believe in passionately. It's one that I think we have to solve. You look around the country, we talked about Seattle, we've talked about areas where it's not affordable to live. We're not going to have a city that works for everybody if we don't have a city everybody can live in.
All right, Kenny, bye.
You know, when we talk about this and you're asking me the difference, I think that one of the things that I would talk about is that when we are talking about political parties, often we talk about the national. And imagine every night you see this all over the television. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. I came to Charlotte to go to Queens College. And what I'd like to say that's different about me is that I am about what happens here at home. And so my focus around good paying jobs and the opportunity, often people say, well, you know, if you're in this party, you're not for necessarily jobs. I think the foundation of our community is recruiting good paying jobs and giving people the opportunity to participate in our economic system. And so where I would be is that I believe what's local is important, and I believe that everyone should have the opportunity to work. I grew up on a street where I lived on with everyone getting up and going to work that day. I want every kid in Charlotte to get up and see that role model, that work makes a difference. It gives you intent and purpose in your life, and you ought to be able to afford to live here, and you ought to be able to work here.
All right, got a one-word answer here. Describe who you are in your candidacy.
I am trustworthy.
Trustworthy. Kenny?
Change.
Change? Okay. Anything else that you want to add right now before we leave?
Quickly. You know, quickly, I'm proud of the city, and I'm proud of the opportunity to serve, and I'm humbled by the support, and I really would appreciate your vote.
Kenny?
We've got a ton of enthusiasm behind our candidacy. I, too, would like your vote on November 7th. You're going to have very stark contrast between our two candidacies on very big issues, transformational issues that will impact our city for the next 50 years. I think I'm the candidate to best deliver on that.
All right, we want to thank both of you here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it was great.
If I can just say one word, I respect the passion and the commitment to service that both of you bring. Brian and I are very impressed with both of your candidates.
Thanks for having us on. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we
Can
want
I
to
get
thank
one of these in the house?
They are pretty nice. And we want to thank both candidates for sure here to take time to talk with us about the important issues facing the city.
And of course, now it is your turn. We want you to get out there and vote. Election Day is Tuesday, November 7th, and you can stay with Fox 46 Charlotte both on air and online at fox46charlotte.com for the latest in Charlotte politics and news.
Thanks for watching.